There are some things in life we just take for granted, right? The laws of physics, the rules of math, and the calendar. The way we count our years feels so solid, so unshakable. But what if it's not? Yeah, that's a pretty wild thought, but it's the core idea behind the source material we're digging into today. A group of researchers seriously proposed that a whole millennium of our past was just invented by scholars back in the 15th and 16th centuries. It sounds impossible, I know. So let's just walk through the clues they present, one by one.
All right, so where do we even start with a theory this big? Well, the first piece of the puzzle, they claim, is hiding in plain sight on art and documents that are centuries old. It all comes down to a few strange characters used in the dates.
Okay, check this out. This is a portrait of an 18th century historian. Now look at the date, I-735. Our brains automatically read that I as the number 1. But the theory asks, hang on a second, why use a letter for just the first digit and then regular Arabic numerals for the rest? They argue this isn't just style, it's a clue.
And it's not a one-off thing. Here's another one, from a super famous engraving by Albrecht Dürer. The date is written I.524. According to the theory, that I is separated by dots on purpose. It's like the artist is trying to make it crystal clear that it's separate from the numbers that come after it.
And once you start looking, you see this pattern popping up. Here's a portrait of a composer, Carlo Broschi, dated 795. A publisher's mark that reads I-597. And then you get this artwork where the date begins with the letter J. Now what's really wild is that this date also has the number 1 in it, written as a Roman numeral I, and it looks totally different from that J at the beginning.
So it all leads to the big question, right? If these letters aren't the number 1, then what on earth are they? Well, the theory has a pretty shocking explanation that could change how we read these dates entirely. And this is where the theory drops its bombshell. The I, or J, is supposedly an abbreviation for Isius, which is Latin for Jesus. So a date like I-524 wouldn't be the year 1524. It would actually mean in the year of Jesus, 524. If that's true, whoa. Suddenly, a massive chunk of our timeline is off by exactly 1,000 years. Okay, so let's move on to the next piece of this puzzle, because the theory suggests that sometimes the 1000 wasn't even abbreviated, it just wasn't there at all. Take a look at this Russian naval map. It's supposed to be from the mid-18th century, but the text on it is very clear. It was made in the year 740, not 1740, just 740. So the source asks a pretty simple question. Why would you just leave out the most important number, the 1000? And this isn't just a weird Russian thing. The theory points over to Italy during the Renaissance. We call the 1400s the 15th century. You know what the Italians called it at the time? The Quattrocento, which literally means the 400s. And the 1200s were the Duecento, the 200s. It's almost like, for them, that first millennium just wasn't even part of the equation. So if 1,000 years were added to our calendar, where exactly did they go? And what was, or maybe what wasn't, there before? The theory proposes that this phantom millennium was slotted right into the period we now call the Dark Ages. This timeline really lays out the whole argument. The theory suggests that history moves along just fine until about 200 AD. And then there's a huge 1,000-year gap. This is the so-called phantom time. Proponents argue there was hardly any cultural innovation during this era, and more importantly, there's a suspicious lack of original documents that can be verifiably dated to that time. And that's a huge part of the argument. The source claims that if you try to find original documents with clear, unambiguous dates on them from before the 1400s, it's incredibly difficult. They argue that a lot of artifacts from that era are only dated because modern historians made educated guesses based on context, not because the creator actually wrote a date on it. And that leads to the million-dollar question at the heart of this whole thing. If this era was as real and bustling as we're told, where are all the signed, dated, original records? Were they all just lost or destroyed? Or were they never there to begin with? All right, so if you have a 1,000-year hole in the timeline, what do you fill it with? Well, the final part of this theory gives a pretty provocative answer. They filled it with historical copies, duplicates. The source points to what it calls some seriously startling coincidences, like the 2 Napoleons. I mean, think about it. Both were artillery officers who rose to become the head of France. And, weirdly enough,
Both had sons whose lives followed a strangely similar path, offset by almost exactly 50 years. The theory says those aren't just coincidences, they're echoes of the same story being told twice.
But the idea of historical copies goes even deeper, and it all revolves around this one, very specific number, 1168. According to the source, this is the magic number, the exact number of years that separates an original history from its supposed copy.
And here it is, the theory's grandest claim of all. It's called a Catherinian shift, named after Catherine the Great, when Russian history was supposedly all written down. The claim is that the entire history of ancient Rome was basically copied and pasted to create the history of early Russia, with every event just shifted forward by exactly 1,168 years. I mean, listen to how the source material itself puts it. It says the two histories are similar like two cars from the same factory, released with a gap of 1,168 years. The argument is that whenever a Roman historian writes about something happening, a Russian historian writes about an almost identical event exactly 1,168 years later.
And so we're left with this really unsettling question. From strange letters on old paintings to entire empires that might just be historical echoes of each other, this theory challenges the very foundation of our timeline. Now, whether it's a fringe conspiracy or a hidden truth, it really forces you to ask, how certain are we about our own history?